All right. Thanks for tuning in to another episode of The War Room, courtesy of YouTube. I am your host, Admiral Sigma Jones. Our co host, Mr. Logic's Finest, is here as well. First and foremost, we just want to give a shout out to our subscribers for this new channel. Thanks for listening in. Thanks for tuning in. We truly appreciate the love and support. And also, we would like to welcome you all to the first ever War Room channel. This channel is dedicated to everything in regards to World War II. So we will be uploading all of our live streams here, as well as previous live streams, as well as content from Relics of the Past, and even a few gaming adventures from the likes of the World of Warships, World of Airplanes, and much more. So, before we get started, let me, as always, introduce the man of the hour for this particular series, the one who just strikes a chord when it comes to truth and logic, Logic Finest himself. Sir, how you doing on today?
I'm doing good. How are you? How are you?
Doing really good as well. I do have to apologize for those that are subscribed to the channel. I haven't been working lately as far as uploading the old contents up to this channel. Mainly just been busy with side projects and everything. But I'm just glad that today and tonight, depending on where you are in the world, we finally get to put this channel into action.
That's awesome, man. We recently came back from a vacation. My girlfriend and I went to Bhutan, tiny little country, literally in the Himalayas. It's amazing. If you get the chance, Google it, look at it. I highly recommend you take your significant other and you go there for yourself. But we will talk about that on the back end.
Wow, that is interesting. And also shout out to the subscribers that are here tonight, JJ Wilson, Isa Sama, and Masculinity. Good to see you guys as well. So, without further ado, let's go ahead and kind of get right into tonight's discussion. So, for those that have listened into the previous live stream on the other channel, we were doing a prelude of Hitler's adventure into the eventual Nazi party. And so now, starting with this particular stream, we're going to actually get right into the developments of Adolf Hitler and in regards to his association with the Nazi party, pretty much starting from scratch. And this is going to be a pretty long type of discussion. The book that we're going to be reading from, the biography of Adolf Hitler, which I have posted it here. I have to post the link again. To cover the 1920s, it's actually going to take up 6 chapters. So this will definitely be a lengthy discussion during this time frame. But at the same time, I'm excited because you're not going to find a lot of live streams that go in depth in regards to the developments of these particular figureheads as well as the countries involved in regards to the preludes into World War II. And so, Mr. Logic Finders, what are your thoughts so far?
Well, again, for anyone who studies World War II, then they already know you really have to start back to World War One, specifically from 1919 forward. So, how Germany came out of the war, the desperate and broken situation that the country was in, and that informs you to how Germany got to the point where the political strongman, who was Adolf, how he rose to power, and understanding the fact that up until then, Germany had been a monarchy, that the Weimar Republic was literally the first democracy in the history of Germany. So you absolutely have to study the history of Adolf, what made him, and then study the history of Germany immediately following the war. So those interwar years from 1919 to 1932, granted the war started in 39, but understanding from 1919 to 1932, and then understanding how the political strongman came to be, how he became that unifying voice that this country needed to rebuild itself. Because there has always been this misconception that um, Soviet Russia, Communist China, Communist Cuba, Nazi Germany, that these people are monsters and they're born that way and they're the spawn of Satan. No, they're literally no different from any other country in history. And once you study history, you begin to see the same patterns and the same lessons repeating themselves. So it's amazing.
Yeah, absolutely. And by the way, for the audience that's listening in, for those who have just subscribed to the new channel, feel free to share the channel to other people, like minded folks who enjoy history, but especially World War II history. This will definitely be the channel for them. But to circle back what Logic's Fine is talking about, he's definitely right when he says, in order to understand World War II and the events that happened there, you literally have to go all the way back to the end of World War One. And you have to look at the people who would become the figureheads. And by that, we're talking about the national leaders of these respective countries that are heavily involved in World War II. You have to circle back to look at their upbringing, look at their associations in their early years before they became leaders of their respective country in order to understand why they made certain decisions. And so, like Logis Finance just said, some would argue that World War II started at around 1932. Some would argue it started in 1937, even though on record, most will say that World War II officially started in 1939. However, for those who have watched our previous streams, we both have come to the conclusion that World War II actually officially started right after World War One. And by that, we took a look at the Treaty of Versailles and how that pretty much handicapped a country like Germany into the arms of right wing nationalism. And so eventually, you could say that Treaty of Versailles led Germany down the eventual path of becoming, a Nazi party. And so tonight or today, we're going to look into the early developments of this Nazi party and see why it started to gain some wheels a little bit in the 1920s, but will eventually start to massively expand beyond its own type of party going into the 1930s. So for those listening in, definitely buckle up, tighten that chin strap, because we're about to go very deep into this rabbit hole. All right, so let's go ahead and jump right into it. Again, this is Adolf Hitler, the definitive biography. The links will be posted later on for this particular book if you would like to read it yourself. But for this episode, we're going to start in chapter 4, which is the birth of a party between the years 1919 and 1922. So it first starts off by saying, when I entered the circle of these few men, there could be no question of a party or a movement. But what the German Workers' Party did give Hitler that autumn was a platform for his own ideas. Just as the writing room in the Mannerheim first released his pent-up hatreds and hopes, so this insignificant group of malcontents gave him needed impetus. His first task was to turn what was essentially a debating society into a political organization. Our small committee, which in reality consisted of 7 heads and represented the entire party, was nothing more than the head of a small scat club, recalled an amused Hitler in a serialized newspaper story of those first days. 1919 in Munich was a sad time. Little lights, lots of dirt, unrest, poorly dressed people, impoverished soldiers. In short, the picture resulting from 4 years of war and the scandal of the revolution. The light at their meeting in the back room of the Rosenbad was a single gas flame that burned poorly. When we were assembled, how do we look? Forbidding. Military pants, dyed coats, hats of undefinable shapes, but shiny from wear, our feet in remodeled war boots, and a thick cudgel in our hands as a, quote, walking stick, unquote. In those days, it was a sign of distinction, a proof that one belonged to the people. We were always the same faces. First, we received the brotherly greetings, and we were informed that the seeds had been planted in respective places, or even established, and we were asked if we could make such a report also, and the necessity was stressed to act as a unit. The treasury was usually about 5 marks, and once it reached the high point of 17. Hitler finally persuaded a committee to increase membership by holding larger meetings. At the barracks, he personally typed out on a company typewriter some of the invitations to the first public meeting. Others he wrote by hand. On the night of the first meeting, the Committee of 7 waited for the masses who were expected to appear. An hour passed, but nobody came. We were again 7 men, the old 7. Hitler changed his tactics. The next invitations were mimegraphed, and this time a few came. The number rose slowly from 11 to 13, and finally to 34. So here we see the early developments of the National Socialist Workers' Party, which will eventually become the Nazi Party. And so as Hitler is describing, essentially it only started with 7 men, including himself, and at first they were having a little bit of hard time attracting more people. But as he was showing that they related more to the people by their clothing styles and not seen as elite as of yet, slowly but surely that number started to rise from 7 all the way up to 34.
Yeah, you see, because one thing that Adolf had to his credit, he understood early on the value of image and how painting, or rather putting forth the image of a political party to the masses. He understood people don't really vote issues, they vote people. If they like you, you're going to win. Politics and elections are a popularity contest. That's all that they are. People don't vote policy, they vote who they vote emotions, they vote who they like. So, the added benefit of if times are very tough, if you're saying the things, if you're speaking to the trials and tribulations of the people and you get them to like you, you're pretty much guaranteed to win. And Hitler understood that. That's what politics is. That's the difference that I've repeatedly tried to hammer home on these streams. There was a difference between politics and statecraft. Statecraft is governing. Politics is merely getting elected. It's a popularity contest.
And to me, sir, one of the biggest difference between statecraft and politics, as you always say, follow the money.
Follow the money.
Politics, when it's not played correctly, as you rightfully pointed out, it's all emotions. It's a popularity contest. It's to see who can gather the people in their corner. Whereas when you really want to get things moving in society and you really want to make the necessary changes, that's where as a statesman or statecraft, you got to pony up. Only a few people understand how true government works. and I can say rightfully so, we have been showing little by little how these countries so far utilize their people to get their governments going.
Absolutely. 100%.
All right. So the next section, it says the pittance collected from these meetings was invested in an advertisement in the Münchner Beobachter, a Volkish anti-Semitic newspaper, for a mass meeting in the cellar room of the Hofbräuhaus on October 16th. If only the usual number turned up, the expenses would bankrupt the party. Hitler had insisted, in the face of horror's pessimism, that a crowd would come, and by 7 p.m., 70 people had collected in the smoky room. There is no record of the reception given the main speaker, but almost from the moment Adolf Hitler stepped behind the crude lectern placed atop the head table, the audience was electrified. He was supposed to speak for 20 minutes, but went on for half an hour, spilling out a stream of denunciations, threats, and promises. Abandoning all restraint, he let emotion take over, and by the time he sat down to loud applause, sweat covered his face. He was exhausted but elated. And what before I had simply felt deep down in my heart, without being able to put it to the test, proved to be true. I could speak. It was a turning point not only in his career, but in that of the German Workers' Party. 300 marks had been donated by the enthusiastic listeners. Now the organization had funds to advertise more extensively and print slogans and leaflets. On November the 13th, a second mass meeting was held, this time in another beer hall, the Elberball. More than 130 men, mostly students, shopkeepers, and army officers, paid an admission fee of 50 pfennigs, something new in local politics, to hear 4 speakers. The main attraction was Hitler. In the middle of his speech, hecklers began to shout out, but he had alerted his military friends, and within minutes, the agitators flew down the stairs with gashed heads. The interruption only spurred Hitler to greater rhetorical heights, as he closed with an exhortation to stand up and resist. The misery of Germany must be broken by Germany's steel. The time must come. Once more, he carried the audience with him. He spoke with a primitive force and unabashed emotion that set him apart from the intellectuals who appealed to reason. A police observer, after describing Hitler as a merchant, reported that he had held forth in outstanding manner and was destined to become a professional propaganda speaker. His appeals were visceral. Love of country and hatred of Jews for bringing about the defeat of 1918. By his manner and use of the language of the streets and the trenches, war veterans recognized that he had shared the democracy of the machine gun, barbed wire, and muck, and thus represented the sacred comradeship of the front lines. So here, as we just read, we start to see the turning point for Hitler's political career. And later on, we'll actually show some documentaries that talks about Hitler's time at the beer halls and the type of speeches he gave. But for those who remember the last live stream we did, when Hitler was taking a few classes to learn about, cults and how to recognize them and report them. Even the school teacher himself says that when Hitler got up to speak, he had the ability to capture people's attention. And here, rightly so, you're starting to see that Hitler's magic is starting to, as they say, grow legs and start to get bigger and bigger.
The most effective public speakers, they know to appeal to your emotions. That's why the most effective politicians and the most effective preachers and pastors and religious leaders, they appeal to
Mm.
your emotions. And what
Mm-hmm.
did I just say about the difference between statecraft and politics? Politics is all about getting elected and getting reelected. People don't vote policy, they vote their emotions.
Mm-hmm.
You know, there was a saying, and don't want to offend anyone. The saying goes, religion is the death of rational thinking because it's mostly based on what? Emotion. And that's what makes an effective public speaker. Once you once you can once you can wrap people's emotions around your finger, you can control them and get them to do whatever you want. That's why, me personally, I am not an effective public speaker because I'll never speak to your emotions, only ever to your intellect. But here we see Adolf was a very effective public speaker, and he was well aware of the importance of image when it comes to politics.
Exactly. And to me, when especially when it comes down to today's modern politics, you can show me any politician, prime minister, whoever it may be, outside of monarchy, but you can look at all of these politicians in these supposed democracy type of countries, and I guarantee you that individual was only elected based off of emotions.
Every time, every time. You know, it's funny you say that. The UK, England, over the last 10 odd years or so, they have gone through a revolving door of prime ministers.
Mm-hmm.
Now, I go all the way back to Gordon Brown because Gordon Brown supposedly at the time he was the intellectual, he was a former educator, he was an academic, worked his way up through the party. He was boring, he wasn't flashy, but he was the prime minister that England needed, especially coming after Tony Blair and the wars and everything else. 4 years later, England booted him out because they wanted the flashy and charismatic David Cameron and
Mm-hmm.
dodgy Dave and everything that happened to the country and Brexit and then Theresa May and now you have Boris Johnson. My point is when a leader is elected and he does not speak to people's emotions, you look at the attacks that are leveled at him. Now, there are several leaders that I can mention. Um, some of them are good, some of them are bad, but let's just let's just keep on flowing here.
Right, absolutely. So the next section starts off by saying, in 2 weeks, another enthusiastic meeting was held with an audience of more than 170. And on the 10th of December, a larger hall, the Duchess Reich, was used. When the attendance fell off despite an announcement, which spelled Hitler with 2 T's, that the place was heated, several committee members protested that the meetings were too frequent. There was a violent debate in which Hitler argued that a city of 700,000 inhabitants could stand not one meeting every 2 weeks, but 10 every week. The road they had taken, he said, was the right one. Sooner or later, success was bound to come. His persistence was rewarded. The next hall on the Dackerstrasse was near an army barracks, and the influx of soldiers raised the attendance to over 200. Hitler's ascendancy deeply concerned some of the other members, who objected to his volcanic, mercurial style. Moreover, he was changing the entire face of the organization with the influx of his rough-mannered army friends, and they feared it would all end in ruin. While Drexler was equally distressed, he was so convinced that Hitler was the hope of the party that he supported the move to make him the new chief of propaganda. Promotion only made Hitler more critical of the inefficiency of the party's business procedures. How could one administer properly without an office and equipment? On his own, he found an office at the Sternecker scene of his introduction to the party. It was small and had once been a tap room. The rent was so little, 50 marks a month, that the committee didn't even complain when the landlord removed the wood paneling and left the room looking more like, quote, a funeral vault than an office, unquote. Using funds he got from Captain Mayer, as well as those from the party treasury, he had an electric light installed along with a telephone, a table, a few borrowed chairs, an open bookcase, and 2 cupboards. Hitler's next step was to insist on a paid business manager who would work full-time. He found one in his barracks, a sergeant, upright and absolutely honest, who also brought along his small Adler typewriter. That December, Hitler called for a complete reform of the party's organization from a debating society to a genuine political party. A majority of committee members, content to remain just another extreme rightist group, opposed these changes. They could not see, as Hitler clearly did, that propaganda was not an end in itself, only a means to overthrow the Weimar Republic. Once again, the plodding Drexler supported Hitler, and the two spent hours in the Drexler apartment discussing plans and programs. Their chief bond was a common distrust and hatred of Jewry. Having lost several jobs, so he said, because of Jews and trade unionists, Drexler had become a radical anti-Semite and anti-Marxist. He lived in the pleasant Nymphenburg district, and Hitler would travel there by trolley car. They would become so involved in work that Frau Drexler usually had to call them to supper several times. My little girl used to climb on Hitler's knee, remembered Drexler. She knew she was always welcome. He was Uncle Adolf to her. Now, what I find interesting after reading this section here, Hitler talked about the importance of going from just a debating society into a genuine political party. And I find it interesting that, especially in today's digital world, you'll have many people that would form groups and give their opinions about this or that, wherever it comes into the world. They always got opinions. But then when it's time for the rubber to meet the road and to actually do something about it or make moves about it, they're just content with just complaining and giving their emotions.
Man, you couldn't be more on it. I would say that you stole you stole my thunder, but we are clearly thinking along the same lines because, again, Adolf Hitler understood. One, you have to appeal to people's emotions in order to get them to follow you, in order to get them to vote for you. But he also understood Nothing happens without political power. If you don't have political power, all you're doing is begging. You can
Mm-hmm.
put as much lipstick on a pig, you can call it whatever you want. Nothing happens without political power. And he clearly understood that very well. So he went about cultivating political power. Because again, you can march, you can protest, you can cry, you can complain, you can be a professional victim. Without political power, you have absolutely nothing. So the takeaway here for people should be to understand the importance of political power, whether what you want to accomplish is right or wrong, and those are moral arguments. But at the end of the day, without political power, you will accomplish nothing. And Adolf understood the importance of political power, and it never ceases to amuse me. It never ceases to amaze me how out of every group on the face of this planet, there is literally only one that fails to realize that without political power, you can't accomplish anything in life.
Exactly. And to me, it kind of goes back to the very essence of human nature, at least modern human nature today, is the fact that for a lot of folks, they just rather have other people do things for them. They much rather just follow whatever the main leader tells them and then, so to speak, get what they want later on down the road. And that's even if they get what they want.
You know, it's funny. It's so funny that you say that. I was having a conversation with a young man who started his own business, and I kind of counsel him a bit here and there,
Hmm.
and you know, I was explaining to him the other day when a person says that he's an alpha, he's a top dog, he's A1, he doesn't follow the pack, he's the leader of the pack. Well, you have to understand something. The leader of the pack is still a sheep. The head sheep is still a sheep because he finds his comfort and his self worth and his value from the group of sheep. He's just a
Mm-hmm.
sheep leading the other sheep, but he is still a sheep. A true leader is an independent thinker, a rugged individualist. So whether you are in the back or in the front, just because you're leading the pack, you're still part of the pack. You are not an individual. But again, that's a concept that takes elevation of thought for someone to really wrap their head around.
Exactly. And I laugh when in some of these quote unquote men circles, excuse me, you hear them talk a lot about being alpha and being beta. Oh, I'd rather be alpha in this situation than to be beta and whatnot. And this is one of the reasons why I gave myself the name Sigma Jones. Because if you read the definitions of alpha and beta, as you rightfully pointed out, sir, both of them still rely on recognition from a group. In
Bingo.
other words, you still are relying on external validations. So if you're a rugged individual, as you claim to be, you would actually be more in line with something of a Sigma. Why is that? Because Sigmas, by definition, don't care about being recognized by groups of people. In their definition, they are content with being by themselves, doing what's necessary to do. They have no problems socializing with people. But at the end of the day, they just don't care. So when I hear folks talk about, yes, I'm alpha and I can do all this, do all that, I say to myself, the mere fact that you gave yourself the moniker of alpha tells me you rely on external validation way too much.
Let's look at this from a very simplistic viewpoint. Because, in my personal opinion, the boyosphere, as I call it, is very simplistic in its thinking. You can call it a manosphere, but it's a bunch of adult boys. But I digress. So, quote unquote players will attack simps and saying that simps are, should be laughed at and they should be joked at. But see, here's the thing. What's the difference between a simp and a player? You're every bit as controlled by the panties as the simp. The only difference is you get more panties. But the entire core of your universe revolves around panties. Your first and last thought every day is around panties and how many panties you can get. Everything that you do, the way you act, you speak, you dress, your mannerisms, everything that you own, your financial choices in life, your personal choices in life, everything revolves around you being controlled by panties. So again, besides the fact that you're getting more panties than the simp, you you are merely the same side of the same coin as the simp because you are every bit as equally as controlled. Now, what am I saying? Again, that's the simplistic view, the elevation of thought view. Whether you are a sheep, a follower, or you are the head of the pack, the lead sheep, you're still a sheep. You're all subject to that same binary thinking of group thought.
You know what, good
And
sir?
you know how loath I am to talk about women because that's all these guys talk about from sun up to sundown is women. But
Exactly. That's why I was about to say let's continue
yes, please.
back on the reading before we go deeper down that rabbit hole. Okay. Next it says, one evening in the last days of 1919, Hitler arrived at the Drexlers armed with a sheaf of manuscript on which he had roughly sketched out the official party program. They worked for hours, boiling it down to make it as pithy as possible. We cracked our brains over it, I can tell you, recalled Drexler. By the time they finished it, it was morning. Then Hitler sprang up and banged his fist on the table. These points of ours, he exclaimed, are going to rival Luther's placard on the doors of Wittenberg. There were 25 points to the program, and Hitler wanted to present them to the public at a mass meeting. Predictably, there were objections from the committee, not only to a number of the points, but to an open meeting. At first dubious, Drexler was finally carried away by the idea, and at the next meeting gave Hitler his full support. Those who objected were overruled, and a date was set. February the 24th, 1920. Leaflets and posters printed in bright red were plastered all over Munich. But by this time, Hitler himself began to fear he might be speaking to a yawning hall. The meeting was to start at 7:30 p.m., and when Hitler entered the great Festsaal of the Hofbräuhaus at 7:15, he found it jammed with almost 2,000 people. His heart burst with joy. What particularly pleased him was that more than half the crowd appeared to be communists or independent socialists. He was confident that the true idealists amongst this hostile group would swing over to his side, and he welcomed any disturbance they might provoke. The meeting opened quietly, with the main address by an experienced Völkisch speaker named Dingfelder. He attacked Jews, but did so obliquely. He quoted Shakespeare and Schiller, and was so bland that even the communists weren't offended by anything he had to say. Then Hitler got to his feet. There were no catcalls. He looked anything but an orator in his worn, old-fashioned blue suit, he opened quietly, without emphasis, outlining the history of the past 10 years. But as he told of the post-war revolutions that swept through Germany, passion crept into his voice. He began to gesture. His eyes flashed. Angry shouts came from all parts of the large hall. Beer mugs flew through the air. Hitler's army supporters, swift as greyhounds, tough as leather, and hard as Krupp steel, eagerly went into battle armed with rubber truncheons and riding whips. Troublemakers were hustled outside. At last some degree of order was restored, and Hitler resumed speaking, undismayed by the continuing chorus of derisive shouts. His experience at the Mannerheim had accustomed him to such disturbances, and he seemed to draw energy from them. The audience warmed to his spirit as well as his words, and applause began to drown out the heckling. He spoke scathingly of the tons of paper money being printed, and how the corrupt Social Democrat government only prosecuted petty hoarders. What can such a hoarder do if his name is Hummelberger and not Isidor Bach? This anti-Semitic jibe was followed by as much protest as approval. But once he directed his attack at the Jews from the east, applause drowned out the hecklers. There were shouts of, "Down with the Jewish press." So again, we're starting to see Hitler's oratorial skills starting to grow some legs. And now he's starting to grow an audience of 2,000 people. And I'm reading this, I'm thinking to myself, again, this shows the power of getting to people's emotions. I think there's an old saying that says, bad press is still good press.
It's funny because in Hollywood, there was a saying, there's no such thing as bad press. As long as they're talking about you, that's a good thing. If it's good, it's a win-win. If it's bad, you can spin it, so it's still a win. So the takeaway, and again, I have to agree 1,000%. We're seeing here, Hitler understands public speaking. It's about appealing to people's emotions. Once you get them whipped up, you can get them to follow you and do whatever you want. It really is that simple. People convince themselves that they're thinking when all they're doing is emotionally reacting. And it it brings me back to that live stream that our mutual friend is having at the moment. I'll leave it at that.
Exactly. But to kind of talk on more on this with politics, this is something I want the audience to understand, or just have this little exercise. The next time you have a political discussion with whatever individual you're talking to, ask them, okay, the person that you voted into office, could you tell me what type of work or background they did that enticed you to want to vote them into office? And the reason I say that is because, for me personally, when I asked this specific question to people, almost unanimously, they could not give me the required information of what these individuals they voted for, what type of work they did that enticed them to want to vote them. And what I mean by work is something that doesn't involve emotions.
It's funny you say that because in 2008, Barack Hussein Obama, what did he run on?
He ran on Yes We Can.
He ran on hope.
Yep.
In 2012, what did Barack Hussein Obama, what did he run on?
He ran on hope again.
Change.
Mm-hmm.
So, what actual policies? Ask people this off the top of their heads. Besides Obamacare and besides gay marriage, what actual policies did Barack Hussein Obama actually implement during his 8 years in office? Now, um, I'll tell you this: Barack Hussein Obama extended or continued every single policy of President George Bush. Barack Hussein Obama allowed the assault weapons ban to expire. He allowed the Voter Registration Act to expire. So, if we're talking actual results, we did not have 8 years of Barack Hussein Obama. We had 16 years of George Bush. But I
Mm-hmm.
digress. Let's 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 dive right back into this beautiful article.
Yes, sir, indeed. Next, it says, unaccustomed to speaking to such a large audience, his voice would be loud one moment, weak the next. But even his inexperience was appealing. A 20-year-old law student named Hans Frank was struck by his obvious sincerity. The first thing you felt was that there was a man who spoke honestly about how he felt and was not trying to put something across of which he himself was not absolutely convinced. After the polished phrases of the first speaker, his words had an explosive effect. They were often crude, always expressive, and even those who had come to hoot him were compelled to listen. He spoke simply and so clearly that those at the farthest tables could hear him. What particularly impressed young Frank was that he made things understandable even to the foggiest brain and went to the core of things. We're definitely going to put a pin on that coming back. Finally, he submitted to the audience the 25 theses of the program, asking them to pronounce judgment on them point by point. There was something for almost everyone but Jews. For the patriotic Union of all Germans in the Greater Reich, colonies for access population, equality for Germany among nations, revocation of the Versailles Treaty, creation of a people's army, and a ruthless battle against criminals to ensure law and order. For the workers, abolition of all income unearned by work, confiscation of war profits, expropriation of land without compensation for communal purposes, and profit sharing in large industrial enterprises. For the middle class, the immediate socialization of the great department stores and their lease, at low rates to small tradesmen, generous development of old age national health standards. For the Volkish minded, the demand that Jews be treated as aliens, denied the right to hold any public office, deported if the state found it impossible to feed its entire population, and expelled immediately if they have immigrated after the 2nd of August, 1914.
And what started in 1914 again? Refresh my memory, good sir.
World War One.
You know, if someone stops for a really quick second, right,
Hmm.
and they look at all of these points, again, this brings us back to the Weimar Republic and the condition of Germany after the end of World War One. And if you're looking at
Mm-hmm.
all of these things that he's talking about, again, he's speaking to people's needs because of the horrible conditions of Germany after World War One, and how the Weimar Republic was more concerned in letting people express who they want to be and live how they want to be and create arts and um, gender equality to extremes and expressing yourself to extremes and decadence and everything else. What country does that remind you of? But I digress. So when you look at the condition that Germany was in, the Weimar Republic did not address the hyperinflation and the high unemployment and the massive needs for new infrastructure and how to actually govern a country that for literally up until 1919 had only ever been a monarchy.
Mm-hmm.
So it was brilliant. He was the right man at the right time. But again, not unprecedented. If you look throughout history, he was the strong man who came along during a time of total economic and systemic upheaval in the country after World War One and during the years of the Weimar Republic, which that the point that I talked about. If one only studies history, they will see Adolf was not unique.
Mm.
And there have been plenty of men before and after who've come along who were the same person.
Right. And what I find the most interesting is that when you look at history, and especially someone who enjoys studying history, you would see that there have been countless people who shared the same type of attitude Hitler did. And likewise, if you was to look after Hitler left, there have been many public leaders who shared the same type of attitudes he did. So when the old moniker that says history repeats itself, it is truly an understatement.
Mm-hmm.
Because in my personal opinion, humans are creatures of habits.
Mm-hmm.
And because humans are creatures of habits, when I hear people, especially today's time, that talks about, oh my goodness, this such and such person, this something, I've never heard of this before. It's like, no, no, no. Go read history, and you'll find at least one other person probably did something similar.
Absolutely. 100%. I could not agree more. And also, there is another saying history is written by the victors.
Mm-hmm.
History is written by the victors, and so much of what people think that they know about anything in history, if they ever would take the time to do the research, they would see how much were misrepresentations and how some were just out and out lies.
Right. See, and I'm glad you brought that up before we continue, because you have some people, and I was actually discussing this with my pops this past week, how you have some individuals where the leaders, and in this case, the people who are the victors that write history, they will say one thing, and people, just like sheep, take it for face value and just continue on with their lives as if that's the only truth. Not take into account of, okay, I've heard this from one sided person, but now let's go hear about people who were on the other side and see what their interpretation of this particular person or this particular history. That gives you a broader understanding of events and people, because now, excuse me, now you're not looking at individuals, particularly individuals like Adolf Hitler. You're not looking at him from just one side. You're now looking at him from all different angles. And I can honestly say, myself included, people who actually have gone to look at these historical figures from all angles have a much better understanding than individuals who simply take face value.
That's so very true because Winston Churchill is painted as the second coming and he walked on water. That guy was a monster. And if you talk about someone who was a hateful, angry racist, and I hate to use
Mm-hmm.
that term, but very extremely prejudiced, It was Winston Churchill. But again, history is written by the victors.
Yep,
So,
absolutely.
it is always of interest to me to speak with someone who actually studies history because then once we can get past all the BS of what has been told to you in school from a historical standpoint, and it's amazing how much history is taught in school that is either misrepresentations, half truths, or out and out lies. But if you just do your own simple research, it's not even hidden. It's readily available, but no one
Hmm.
actually goes to look at it and study it. So if you are a person who has actually studied something and we're operating from a base point that you're aware of the half truths and the misrepresentations and the lies, now that's someone who I can have an intellectual conversation with.
Exactly. So the next section starts off by saying, after each point, Hitler would pause to ask if everyone understood and agreed. The majority shouted out raucous approval, but there were organized cries of derision, and some protesters jumped on chairs and tables. Again and again, the truncheon and whip brigade went into action, and by the end of Hitler's 2.5 hour tirade, there was almost unanimous support for every word he uttered. The final applause was tumultuous, and young Frank was fully convinced that if anyone could master the fate of Germany, Hitler was the man. Now, again, we're going to put a pin on this because I really want to come back and talk about this real quick. But to finish up this section, to Hitler, the evening, including his riotous objections, had been an unalloyed triumph. And as the crowd filed out, he felt that the door to his future had at last opened. When I closed the meeting, I was not alone in thinking that now a wolf had been born, destined to burst in upon the herd of seducers of the people. He was living up to his own name, for Adolf was derived from the Teutonic word meaning fortunate wolf. And from that day on, wolf would have a special meaning for him. As nickname among close friends, a pseudonym for himself and his sister Paula, and as a name for most of his military headquarters.
The Wolf's, the Wolf's
Wolf's
Lairs,
Lair.
Hitler's most famous mountain retreat.
Yep, indeed. There was little notice of Hitler's emergence in the Munich newspapers, but the meeting meant that the first major step forward for the German Workers' Party. 100 new members were enrolled. At Hitler's insistence, a list of members had already drawn up and proper membership cards issued. To give the impression of size, the first card was numbered 501, with the members listed in alphabetical order. Excuse me. Hitler, the painter, was number 555.
He understood the power of propaganda.
Yep. Now, before we continue, I want to go back on how much emotion plays on everyday people. Now, in the previous section, if you haven't noticed, there is a law student who was in this particular meeting by the name of Hans Frank. Now, you would think a law student, a person who's educated, who understands logic and reasoning in order to do their job as a future attorney or a district attorney, what have you, you would think that it would be harder to persuade somebody like him based off of emotions. You would think that in order to get to this person to be on my side, I gotta have logic and reason to get with him. But logic and reason was not, pun intended, the reason that swayed this young man to the side of Hitler. What swayed this law student to the side of Hitler? All emotions.
Yeah, but there was a difference between education and intelligence. Education is something you can amass over time, but a person's either born intelligent or they're not. It literally doesn't change. You know, so just because a person has a certain position in life, which is reflective of education, does
Mm-hmm.
not mean that they are actually intelligent. So,
Well, sir,
mo-
I'm glad you say that because for the longest we have people
mhm.
that assume that if you have a college degree that you have to be a very intelligent person. And I laugh so much when I hear this because history clearly shows that having a piece of paper does not mean you are intelligent. And when I'm reading this section, I'm saying to myself, if a law student is persuaded that some knucklehead looking Adolf Hitler is the man that should be in charge of running the fate of Germany. I, I, oh yeah. I, to me, I know I'm speaking to the crowd because Logic, me and you have these conversations behind the scenes, but it's just amazing how much people just want to be led by the hand.
Intelligence is not a reflection of education. Education is education. Education is something that can be amassed over time. You're either born intelligent or you're not. And there are certain things that intelligent people do, and there are certain things that intelligent people do not do. And most intelligent people are not governed by their emotions. So the sad truth is, and when you say what I'm about to say, people are going to call you arrogant. They're going to call you conceited. They're going to call you elitist. They're going to say that you think you're better than. Most people are not very intelligent. In fact, most people are actually unintelligent,
Mm-hmm.
and that's just that's a fact of the human condition. It is what it is. People don't like to hear that. They don't want to accept it. They may inherently know it, but no one wants to actually accept it. Most people are unintelligent. And just because a person can have an alphabet behind their name does not make them intelligent. I've
Yeah.
personally met many scientists who have alphabets behind their name. And they're dumber than a bag of rocks.
Yep. And likewise, I've met physicians, I've met mathematicians, I've met engineers. These are people who have degrees behind their accomplishments. But when it comes down to world views and how to go about things in the world, they are just as much a typical sheep as the poorly educated. Or should I say, the poorly uneducated.
You know, I've been sitting on this for a long time. But when I was a little boy, I was told that how the way that a person expresses himself or herself is a direct sign of their intelligence.
Mm-hmm.
So, if you are a grown adult and if you read at a third grade level and you stumble and fumble and mumble over words as you read, you mispronounce words, you have to slow down and sound out words to properly pronounce them. as a grown adult, regardless of your diction or how well you speak, if you read at a third grade level, you're not intelligent. You're educated, but you're not intelligent. But I digress.
Well, sir, let's move on before we go deeper down that rabbit hole. So the next section says, he began a new life, mixing with an enlarged circle of colorful characters whose common denominator was a love of things German and a fear of Marxism. There was a Munich physician, a believer in sidereal pendulum, who claimed this gave him the power to detect the presence of a Jew in any group of people. A far more importance was a former company commander, whose name, Captain Ernest Röhm, a homosexual. Röhm was an exemplary officer, a comrade to be trusted in peril. He was short and stocky, with closely cropped hair and an engaging smile. He was a walking monument to the war. The upper part of his nose had been shot away, and a bullet had left a deep scar on one cheek. An officer in the new Reichswehr, he once remarked, "Since I'm a wicked and immature man, war and unrest appeal to me more than the orderly life of your respectable Bulger." From the moment the two met at a secret meeting of a nationalist group called the Iron Fist, Rome was convinced that the dedicated corporal was just the man to head the German Workers' Party. Rome had already changed the working class character of the Drexler Horror organization by bringing in so many soldiers. They were the ones who kept order at rowdy meetings. Between Hitler and Röhm were bonds of blood and suffering, since both belonged to the brotherhood of the frontline fighter. And though Röhm had recently replaced Captain Mayer as Hitler's commander, he insisted that his subordinate use the familiar "du," a familiarity, a familiarity which was leading to Hitler's acceptance by other officers. An even closer acquaintance was the writer Dietrich Eckart, who had once remarked that the new breed of political leader must be able to stand the noise of a machine gun. I prefer a vain monkey who is able to give the Reds a salty reply and doesn't run away when people begin swinging table legs to a dozen learned professors. Moreover, their man had to be a bachelor. Then we'll get the women. They had become friends, not merely political acquaintances, despite differences in age, 21 years, and background. Eckert was a university man of culture. Both were bohemians. Both could speak the language of the gutter. Both were nationalists and hated Jews. Eckert believed Jews who married German women should be jailed for 3 years, and if they repeated the crime, executed. So here we have where we're starting to now get some figureheads that will become acquaintances with Hitler and help to develop more of the Nazi Party later on down the road. The first one being Ernest Röhm, and you'll hear more about Ernest Röhm later on down the road when we talk about the brown shirts, and you'll also hear more about his influence in the brown shirts and how they will eventually become, I believe, the SS troopers. And
No, the brown shirts became the SD when
okay, the
Hitler
SD.
when Hitler had Röhm executed. He rolled the SD into the SS under Himmler. So the SS and the SD were separate. Hitler wanted to roll them into the SS under Himmler, but he couldn't do it as long as Rome was still alive because he had a lot of support. So he had to frame him as being a traitor, which allowed him to be executed. And that's how the SD got rolled into the SS, which is funny because after the war, the SD was then separated and then the SD became the Stasi. But we're getting way down the line.
Well, thank you for the correction because I knew that they would eventually become a new member of itself, but it was Ernest Röhm who founded the Brown Shirts. And like I said, later on down the road, we're going to really see how this secret police of the Nazis really was the dirty dogs of the group. And so there's Ernest Röhm, and then we also now hear of Dietrich Eckart. And this will be an individual who
Dietrich.
oh, excuse me. Yep, Dietrich Eckart. This is an individual who will later on start to help get things moving on a political side for Hitler, as far as his connections and everything. So again, these particular figureheads, you want to keep them in mind going on down the road. All right. So next it says Eckart, a born romantic revolutionary, was a master of coffeehouse polemics, a sentimental cynic, a sincere charlatan, constantly on stage, lecturing brilliantly if given the slightest opportunity, be it at his own apartment, on the street, or in a cafe. A drug addict and a drunkard, his vulgarity was tempered by vestiges of his social background. Hitler revealed in the company of this warm and voluble intellectual buccaneer who was playing Falstaff to Hitler's Prince Hall in Munich's ribald night world. Eckart became the young man's mentor. He gave Hitler a trench coat, corrected his grammar, took him to better class restaurants and cafes, and introduced him to influential citizens. This is the man who will one day liberate Germany. The two spent hours discussing music, art, and literature, as well as politics, and the association with the tempestuous writer left a lasting mark on Hitler. Several weeks after the Hofbräuhaus meeting, the two men set off together on an adventure in Berlin. Elite Free Corps troops under General Walther von Lotwitz, ordered to disband by the socialist Weimar government, had instead marched on the capital where they seized control of the city and installed their own chancellor, a minor civil servant named Kapp. Both Hitler and Eckart saw the potentialities of the right-wing Kapp putsch and volunteered to go to Berlin and determine whether there was any possibility for joint revolutionary action in Bavaria. Captain Röhm approved the project, and they were sent off in an open sports plane. It was Hitler's first flight, and the pilot, a young war ace, Lieutenant Robert Ritter von Grimm, winner of the Pour la Marette, would become the last Luftwaffe commander. The weather was so turbulent that despite Grimm's skill, Hitler kept vomiting. For a time, it appeared as if the mission was aborted, since the airport at their interim stop was occupied by striking workers. But Hitler snapped on a fake goatee, and Eckart posed as a paper dealer, and the party was permitted to proceed to Berlin. When they touched down at Berlin, the one Hitler vowed that he would never, never fly again. Although Berlin had surrendered to the Free Corps on March 13th without a shot being fired, there was a hollow victory. Theirs was a hollow victory. From the beginning, his hastily planned putsch, was a fiasco, and what brought it down was not a counterattack or acts of sabotage, Berliners, joining the rest of the nation in a wave of anti-militarist feeling, had apparently concluded that another revolution was too much. And when a general strike was called by the Ebert government, the workers responded so wholeheartedly that it was impossible for the cap regime to function. Electricity was shut off. Trolley cars and subways stopped. There was no water. Garbage rotted in the streets. Shops and offices were closed. So here we see that, as before, we talk about a lot of the political movements that's going on in the Weimar Republic, how the government was pretty unstable due to the fact that in order for a party to win the majority, most of the time they had to team up with another party, which would cause more unstableness because you now have two parties within a major party that will try to vote on things their way rather than working for a common goal. And there were a lot of revolutions. And later on, we're going to talk about more of Cap Pooch and everything. But here we see that they too attempted their own revolution. And for the most part, it was a failure because the people of Berlin was like, we are just not into that right now.
Yeah, it may have been too soon, too early. The right man, but the wrong time. But there were the biggest takeaway here was that there was a constant a putsch here, a putsch here, which is basically just a political coup. So the Weimar Republic, as a party on its own, no one party could get the majority of the country behind any one party. So there were always alliances between competing parties who had different views on how to run the country. So two or sometimes three or five in some instances had to come together to try to form a government. It was chaos, and that's what the country had devolved into. Which again, the strong man comes about during times of economic and social hardship. The country was destroyed after World War One. The Weimar Republic never addressed the core issues of the country, and the strong man came about during times of hardship. And we're seeing it.
Right? Indeed. Well, the next session talks about this. Only Berlin's nightlife went on unimpeded. Unimpeded. In darkness or candlelight. It was corruption out of an overdone movie with heavily rough girl prostitutes of 11 competing with whip-totting Amazons in high lacquered boots. There were cafes for every taste and perversion, homosexuals, lesbians, exhibitionists, sadists, masochists. Nudity had become boring, and art itself was plumbing the nadar of obscenity, disillusionment, and cynicism.
I just want to stop right here because again, I can't help but noticing the similarities between American culture right now. America is headed down the same exact path
Mm-hmm.
that Germany did under the Weimar Republic. And if people keep allowing the, the, the feminists and the rainbow mafia, the alphabet mafia, to keep continuing down the path, the same exact thing is going to happen. It's a textbook. It has happened before, and you're seeing it again. Sorry, I digress.
Oh no, absolutely. And to me, this is where again the audience needs to pay close attention because if you're a student of history, you should be looking at this and be like, huh, something how America is exhibiting the exact same issues.
Again, you know what? Call me a dinosaur if you want, but I'm cut from a different cloth. Men are men, women are women. Men are supposed to be masculine, women are feminine, and all of this craziness that is going around now. I mean, you know what? Back into the article. I'm sorry.
No problem, sir. So next it says Berlin was the center of the Dadaist movement, and one of its poets, Walter Mehring, was giving Berliners a frightening look into the future in the form of a slangy, satirical verse. And this is what the verse says. Come on, boys, let's all go. Off to the pogrom with a ho-ho, ho-ho-ho. Pull in your bellies and throw out the Jews. With swastika and poison gas, let's have a go at murder in the mass.
Wow.
He definitely had some foresight. And keep in mind, the Nazi Party was just somebody's ideas at the moment. So for this poet to come up with this slang and really be this prophetic about Germany's future, he definitely had some foresight.
You know, there was a correlation that I can make here, but I'm going to cycle back to it at the end of this because you know what? No, I will speak. I will speak on it now. If you are an individual and if you are of a group and you have obtained, or rather attained, success in your life, economic, social, political, you get attacked. Now it's put forth that it's because of something external that defines your group. But in reality, is it this supposed external identifier of your group, or is it your success in life, which is why you're attacked? Something to think about.
Oh yeah, definitely let the audience chew on that for a bit. Next it says the general strike of the Ebert government turned into a Frankenstein monster. By crushing the Cap forces so successfully, it opened the way for another wave of leftist revolt. The communists stirred up disorders throughout Germany to such a degree that President Ebert was forced to beg General von Seeckt, who had walked out on the government a few days earlier, to accept command of all military forces and crush the Red Revolt. His first act was to recommission all the Free Corps troops who had been disbanded. In a wry turn of events, the mutineers of yesterday were called on to enforce law and order today. And in a stroke of black comedy worthy of the Dadaist playwright, Ebert paid the Free Corps troops the bonus that the Cap regime had promised them to overthrow his government. The task facing the reorganized Free Corps was formidable. In Saxony, a Soviet republic had already seized power, and by the 20th of March, a Red Army of 50,000 workers had already occupied most of the Ruhr. That same day, the communist Ruhr Echo announced that the red flag must wave victoriously over the entire nation. Germany must become a republic of Soviets and, in union with Russia, the springboard for the coming victory of the world revolution and world socialism. On the 3rd of April, the Free Corps troops swept through the Ruhr, wiping out red strongholds and dealing ruthlessly with any survivors. If I were to tell you everything a youthful volunteer of one Free Corps unit wrote his family, you would say I was lying to you. No pardon is given. We even shot 10 Red Cross nurses on sight because they were carrying pistols. We shot these little ladies with pleasure. How they cried and pleaded with us to save their lives. Nothing doing. Anybody with a gun is our enemy.
Before you say a word, people will tell you we've all had it drilled into our heads. The greatest monster in the history of this planet is Adolf Hitler because of the extermination of the 6 million Jews. But see, here's the thing: Chairman Mao Zedong of China murdered 100 million of his own people.
Mm-hmm.
Not that it's a contest of evil, but 6 million of your own versus 100 million of your own. You decide who's the real monster of the 20th century.
Oh, and not only that, let's throw Mr. Stalin himself,
Stalin,
which
he
we
killed
will be
50 million of his own people.
exactly. We're definitely going to be talking about him coming up. But I mean, for these individuals that's talking about, we need to have socialism and we need to have some form of, some utopia where everybody's equal. It's like, huh? If you look at those two leaders who actually ran a socialist environment, I mean, I thought the right wing people were ruthless, but they was on a whole different level.
You know, the whole thing about this agenda, which is again, when I look at the Weimar Republic, I see a mirror image to what's happening in America.
Mm-hmm.
People are not equal. Okay, we are inherently unequal. Some of us are more attractive than others. Some of us are faster. Some of us are stronger. Some of us are more intelligent. Some of us apply ourselves better. We study harder. We work harder. You will never have equality of outcome amongst humans. The best you can hope for, and you should strive for, is equality of opportunity. That
Mm-hmm.
you absolutely should have. I wholeheartedly stand behind that. But you will never have equality of outcome. You can't, because we are not all equal. And all the feminists who say that, they can do anything that a man can do, no, you can't. You know what? Find yourself in your car with a flat tire at night, in the rain, in the cold, and see who you call. Your daughter, your sister, your aunt, or a man, since you think we're all equal. But I digress. So the bottom thing is, whether it's mental or physical, we're not all equal. So there will never be equality of outcome. And when you try to force or engineer equality of outcome, you ironically achieve the opposite effect because you're forcing it. So how is anything now equal?
Mm.
I'll leave you with this. New York City, my beloved hometown, I'm sad to say, is doing away with the four specialized high schools: Bronx Science, Brooklyn Tech, Stuyvesant, and the last one, which escapes me at the moment. But the point is, in order for students to feel equal, they're doing away with the standards of having the very best and the brightest. So
Mm-hmm.
this is how you're engineering equality of outcome. You see, when you force equality of outcome, you're actually achieving the opposite effect of what it is that you claim that you want.
And not only that, speaking of getting rid of standardized testing, um, the NCAA have just announced that it would no longer require its student athletes to take a standardized test in order to enroll into college.
You know, the absurdity of that is the fact that I personally went to school with two NBA stars and a third long after I graduated. I played against several NBA stars when I was in high school. And I can tell you for a fact, most of those guys are dumber than a bag of rocks.
Mm-hmm.
So when you tell me about standardized tests, these guys, everything you've seen in television and movies and every stereotype, they're all true. They don't go to class. They're very they're very unintelligent, a lot of them. People take tests for them. People do their homework for them. They rarely go to class. That's all true. So now what you're really doing is you're removing the last facade of what was already an absolute farce.
Yeah. Yes. Yes, indeed.
I don't know. Again, we have covered the Weimar Republic, and America is America is the second coming of the Weimar Republic, and they're heading down the same exact path.
Yep. We are definitely the Weimar 2.0. So this next section says by the time Hitler and Eckert arrive in Berlin after their sickening play ride from Munich, the Kapp Putsch was nearing its end. From the airport, they proceeded to the Reich Chancellery, where they talked with Kapp's press representative, Trebek Lincoln, a Hungarian Jew. An adventurer and something of a rascal, he was arrested in New York as a spy for the Kaiser. He informed them that Kapp had already fled, and they had better stay under cover lest they be arrested. Eckert, unhappy at finding a Jew in charge, reputedly seized Hitler's arm and said, "Come on, Adolf, we have no further business here." But the two stayed on in the capital to meet their hero, General Ludendorff, who was preparing to flee south in disguise, and to confer with a number of North Germans who shared their dreams, members of the Stahlhelm, Steel Helmet, a supranational group of veterans, and with leaders of Volkist organizations who were getting substantial financial backing from industrialists. Eckert also introduced his pupil to the salon of Helen Bechstein, wife of the piano manufacturer. She was instantly enthralled by Germany's young messiah and promised to present him to others in her influential circle. Hitler returned to Munich on the March of 31st. That same day, he became a private citizen, perhaps of his own accord, more likely because he was ordered to do so. He packed his belongings, received his demobilization pay of 50 marks, along with a coat, cap, jacket, pants, a suit of underwear, a shirt, socks, and shoes. He sublet a small back room at Feierstrasse 41, a middle-class district near the Isar River, dominated by 3- and 4-story buildings with shops and offices on the ground floor and small apartments and rooms above. Hitler's was a tiny cell, 8 by 15 feet, not much bigger than his cubicle at the Mannerheim. It was the coldest room in the house, and according to the landlord, Herr Ellinger, some lodgers who've rented it since got sick. Now we only use it as a storeroom. Nobody will have it at any more. It was no accident that Hitler had chosen a room a few doors from the offices of the Münchener Beobachter. It had a new name, the Völkischer Beobachter, and continued to be the mouthpiece for anti-Semitic and anti-Marxist sentiments. Hitler's opinion of Jews was largely reflected in this newspaper. Recently, for instance, a story on page 1 had carried this headline, "Do a real job on the Jews." The author recommended that Germany be cleared of all Jews, no matter how ruthless the measures. From such articles, most of them written by refugees from Russia, Hitler absorbed new information concerning the rising peril of communism. His own chief targets were Jews and the peace treaties. Next on his list was the fight against Marxism. Both he and Eckert had a grudging admiration for the dedication of German communists and did their best to win them over. In an article entitled German and Jewish Bolshevism, Eckert had even recommended what he called German Bolshevism. And once, with Hitler on the platform beside him, he told a party meeting that the German communists were idealistic men, unconsciously working for Germany's salvation. The Russian exiles resisted such a compromise, and their articles and conversations on the peril of Bolshevism were having an increasing effect on Hitler. The most persuasive of these apostles of doom from the East was Alfred Rosenberg, the young architect artist from Estonia. At their first meeting, neither was much impressed by the other. I would be lying if I said I was overwhelmed by him, recalled Rosenberg. It was only when he heard Hitler speak in public that he became enthralled. Here I saw a German frontline soldier embarking on this struggle in a manner as clear as it was convincing, counting on himself alone with the courage of a free man. That was what drew me to Adolf Hitler after the first 15 minutes. So again, here we're now seeing Hitler working his magic, being able to convince even the most hardened individuals on the opposite end over to his side. And he's starting to bring more influential people over to his circle, which again shows you the power of an individual who can reach into the core of people's feelings and be able to draw it out.
Exactly, but again, what excuse me, what keeps staying with me is that Adolf understood and understands the power of appealing to people's emotions. And at the heart of it, but he's always driving for political power because he understands that just whipping up people's emotions without political power achieves nothing. So, again, it never ceases to amuse me how every single group of people on the face of this planet understand that without political power, you're doing nothing but begging. But there's only one group that somehow refuses to get that memo.
Indeed. Before we go down that rabbit hole, let's continue to the next section. And salute to Ace in the chat room. Good to see you, sir. Next it says, the attraction and admiration became mutual in the next few months with the appearance of Rosenberg's articles in Eckert's weekly paper and other nationalist racist publications. What particularly impressed Hitler was Rosenberg's revelations that Bolshevism was but the first step in a vast global Jewish plot to conquer the world. Final proof of this was revealed the day after the historic Hofbräuhaus meeting, with publications in the Völkischer Beobachter of the Protocols of the Elders of Zion. This purported to be the verbatim report of 24 secret sessions of the Elders of Zion in Basel, Switzerland, in a conspiracy to conquer the world. This book was supporting evidence of Hitler's own prejudice and fears. It was also a turning point in his relations with Rosenberg. Hitler began taking his warnings of Bolshevism to heart, and the communist issue, till now subsidiary, gradually took on more import in the party credo. Hitler was not alone in acceptance of the protocols. That May, a long article appeared in the London Times asserting that it should be taken seriously and seemed to be a bona fide document written by Jews for Jews. The protocols, spreading throughout Europe and into the Americas, spurred a virulent anti-Semitism, which had been inaugurated by the advocates of Christianity. For centuries, Catholics had been instructed that the Jews had killed Christ, and the first Protestant, Martin Luther, had charged that the Jews had not only transformed God into the devil, but was a plague, pestilence, pure misfortune, a blight on Christianity and the world, which had to be dealt with peremptorily. Hitler's hatred of Jews had come primarily from his own observation in the last days of the war and during the revolutions that followed. What he learned from Rosenberg, the Thule Society, and from Gobineau, Luther and other famous anti-Semites merely buttressed his own conclusions. He borrowed only what he wanted from such sources. He probably had been much more influenced by pamphlets and freakish right-wing newspapers that breed venomous anti-Semitism. Since his early days in Vienna, he had devoured such gutter literature, and the seed came to the fruition on Friday the 13th of August 1920 at a mass meeting in Munich's famous Hofbräuhaus. For 2 hours, he expanded on the subject of why we are against the Jews, and from the beginning made it clear that his party alone will free you from the power of the Jew. In great detail, he told how the Jews had polluted society since medieval days, while distinguished by neither originality nor rhetoric. His speech was a marvel of propaganda. Although his own anti-Semitism was personal rather than historical, Hitler demonstrated a genius for amalgamating facts, with events of the day in a manner calculated to inspire resentment and hate. He was often interrupted by shouts of approval and laughter. 18 times the audience burst into loud applause, and the reaction was particularly boisterous, where he referred to the Jew as a nomad involved in highway robbery. So, this section, I guess you could say the conspiracy theorists would have loved reading this section.
Well, the first thing is this: the protocols of the learned elders of Zion has been proven as a hoax.
Mm-hmm.
That has been thoroughly disproven and debunked around the world. The next thing is that I wonder how many people even know that Martin Luther King was named after Martin Luther, who was a German Catholic priest who was the first Protestant. Protestant church was literally named and created after Martin Luther, and that he was a virulent anti-Semite.
Mm-hmm.
Again, there's so much of the truth is out there, but people just don't research. But I say all of that to say that, again, this gives background, or at least it should give people some background into the history of Adolf and of the many things that shaped him to become the person who he was, because people don't really understand the many facets and layers that Adolf was.
Indeed. And it's interesting that you bring up that Martin Luther King was named after Martin Luther, who most people when they hear of Martin Luther, they think of the guy who pretty much helped to reform the Christianity churches. But if you dive deeper in his background, again, being a student of history, you'll find that Martin Luther was pretty ruthless in his opinions of certain people. But to be named... Oh, go ahead.
No, I'm sorry. Please continue.
I was just saying, to be named after that person, Ugh.
Yeah, Martin Luther. So the thing about Martin Luther was that Martin Luther felt why he was called a Protestant and the Protestant church, and then later the Lutheran church. So Martin Luther was a Catholic priest, and he felt that the Catholic Church had strayed away from the fundamental tenets and teaching of Catholicism.
Mm-hmm.
And he laid out his manifesto. He put it up on the central town post for everyone to read it. Martin Luther never wanted to start his own church. He never wanted to be a reformer against the church. He just said, listen, this is what I think, this is what I feel is going on. Other people took up that cause and they became Protestants. And
Mm-hmm.
that was the beginning of the Protestant church. Later on, another church was started in his name, the Lutheran Church. The Lutheran
Mm-hmm.
Church is based on, again, the teachings of Martin Luther. But he was a strict religious Catholic zealot.
Mm-hmm.
Again, that may not necessarily be the person who a lot of people want to follow and model themselves after if they really took the time to research who this man was.
Indeed. Indeed. Well, to wrap this up, this is the final section we're going to read for this episode. It says his earlier attacks on Jews have been low key in comparison to this carefully prepared denunciation. For the first time in public, he charged that the Jewish conspiracy was international and that their advocacy of equality of all peoples and international solidarity was only a scheme to denationalize other races. Previously, he had called the Jew despicable, immoral, and parasitic. Tonight, the Jew was a destroyer, a robber, a pest with the power to undermine entire nations. Hitler called for an all-out struggle to the death. There was no difference between the East and West Jews, the good or bad ones, the rich or poor ones. It was a battle against the entire Jewish race. The slogan, "Proletarians of the world, unite," no longer applied. The battle cry must be, "Anti-Semites of the world, unite." People of Europe, free yourself, Hitler demanded, in short, a thorough solution which he vaguely but ominously described as the removal of Jews from the midst of our people. He had taken a long step forward on the road of anti-Semitism. Earlier in the year, the Münchener Post, had been amused by his comic impersonation of Jews. Adolf Hitler behaved like a comedian, and his speech was like a vaudeville turn. But this present speech brought a more sober recognition from the same newspaper of his platform magic. One thing Hitler has, you must give him credit. He is the most cunning rabble-rouser in Munich, practicing such mischief. Yet he was far more than a mischief maker whose appeal was merely to racists. His call for active anti-Semitism was also being heeded by those whose ultimate dream was a greater Reich. Respectable, middle-class, middle-aged Bürgers who had to subscribe to the words of Heinrich Class, president of the Pan-German League, back in 1913. The Jewish race is the source of all dangers. The Jew and the German are like fire and water. In time, preached Class, a man would arise to lead them in this fight against Jewry. We await the Führer. Patience, patience, he will come. Persevere, work, and unite. Scribbled outlines of other speeches delivered by Hitler during this period indicate the depth of his obsession. The bloody Jew, butchering of spiritual leadership of people, the Russian funeral parlor, the Jew as dictator, and today's Germany, battle between democracy and dictatorship. No, between Jew and Germanic. Who understands this? Hunger and peace, inflation, through stock market and speculation, need for luxuries, etc. Who profits? The Jews. Genocide preparation for the mass insanity can be proven through mass need. Hunger. Hunger as a weapon at all times. Hunger to serve the Jews. The world revolution means subjugation of the entire world under the dictatorship of the World Exchange and its masters, Judai. As can be seen from these excerpts, Hitler's obsessive hatred was developing into an encompassing political philosophy. At the same time, his hitherto obscure concept of foreign policy was taking shape. By September of that year, he had reached the point where he told one audience, "We are tied and gagged. But even though we are defenseless, we do not fear a war with France." In addition, he was considering the possibility of a foreign ally, and recently had declared, "For us, the enemy sits on the other side of the Rhine, not in Italy or elsewhere." Also for the first time, perhaps inspired by Rosenberg and the Protocols, Hitler publicly assailed the Jews for their internationalism. His equation of Jews and internationalism and his selection of Italy as an ally against France were still tentative concepts, but did indicate his striving for a logical and practical foreign policy. He had come out of the war with the conventional beliefs and prejudices of the frontline soldier, and emerged from the traumatic series of Red Revolutions with many of the conventional beliefs and prejudices of the man in the street. At last, he was putting his own system in order. But his primary goal, hatred of Jews, which had been surfacing and submerging erratically since the days of struggle in Vienna, was not at all conventional. Adolf Hitler was advancing faster in the field of practical politics. Almost single-handedly, he had broadened the base of the party, which now bore the name the Nationalistische Deutsche Arbeiterpartei, NSDAP.
Nationalistische Deutsche Arbeiterpartei.
Which that translates to the National Socialist German Workers' Party. It was a name he hoped would inspire and incite, that would scare off the timid and attract those willing to bleed for their dreams. In this same spirit, Hitler insisted upon a party flag that could compete with the flaming red communist banner. "We wanted something red enough to out-Herod Herod," recalled Drexler. "Something to outdo the Reds, but quite different." Finally, a dentist from Sternberg submitted a flag which had been used at the founding meeting of his own party logo, a swastika against a black-white background. The swastika, originally a Sanskrit word meaning all is all, long a symbol of the Teutonic Knights, and had been used by Lance von Liebenfels, the Thule Society, and a number of Free Corps units. For centuries, it had represented not only for Europeans, but also certain North American Indian tribes, the wheel of the sun, or the cycle of life. From now on, perhaps forevermore, the swastika would have a sinister connotation.
It has to be one of the most iconic symbols on this planet, along with the Catholic cross and the pyramid. You can ask a person in the middle of a desert who's been riding camels his entire life, You show him a swastika, and he knows exactly what it means.
Mm-hmm. And you know what? Now that you bring that up, on our next stream, we're actually going to do a little exercise where I'm actually going to bring a symbol of the swastika just for exercise purpose and another symbol, and we're going to see if the audience can tell the difference between the two. Because believe me, even I myself, I had to do a little education where my sensei, and this is just to give you audience a hint, my sensei showed us a reverse sign of the swastika.
Before,
And
before you,
oh,
and I apologize for cutting you off.
oh, go ahead,
The
go ahead.
German swastika is the reverse swastika.
Mm-hmm.
The swastika, the German swastika is the reverse swastika. It is a Sanskrit religious symbol. Hitler reversed it.
Right, and that's where I was getting at because the sensei, when he was showing us this and all, he showed that the original swastika had a different meaning to it, especially from the Asian side of things.
Mm-hmm.
But Hitler and his party pretty much took that symbol, reversed it, and now it is famous for a different connotation. And so I figured on the next stream, we'll do a little exercise to see if the audience could tell the difference of which was the original and which one was the Nazi party symbol. Because once you understand the purpose of the original and how it true meaning was lost thanks to the Nazi party, you're also going to see how much propaganda can literally change a certain meaning and give it, or excuse me, a certain phrase, word, or whatever symbol, and give it a completely different meaning.
Well, it's funny you bring that up because was having a similar conversation with a friend of mine just yesterday.
Hmm.
So after 9/11, you had the Patriot Act.
Mm-hmm.
Presently, you have vaccination mandates
Mm-hmm.
for something that has a 98% survivability rate. More people still have died from the flu than from what's what this mandatory vaccination thing is for. So
Mm-hmm.
I think about this. There was a brilliant line from a very underwhelming film that goes, and I quote, "So this is how liberty dies, to thunderous applause." Once you scare people, you can get them to do whatever you want them to.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm going to bring this full circle back to our friend Adolf. He clearly understood that. You appeal to people's emotions and you can get them to do whatever you want to.
Yep. And see, again, this plays on the fact of human nature. And I've yet to be disproven by this. But at least in modern times, humans just want to be led by the hand. And if you are able to appeal to their emotions, they will willingly, and there's too many examples of this, but they will willingly allow you to lead them by the hand. If it was, I'll put it like this: if it wasn't for human nature, politics and religion would not exist.
So I'm going to leave this right here because I think this is a beautiful way to punctuate this brilliant stream. If someone has a large, abnormally shaped body part and you see it and you know it, if someone else makes a remark about it, how is that somehow ethnic, or hateful. I'm going to leave that right there.
All right, we'll let the audience chew on that. But with that said, I'd like to thank the audience for listening in, and for those who will be listening in on the replay and all. Definitely going forward, we will be back on our normal schedule, going forward for the rest of the year and everything. But good sir, your final thoughts so far in regards to the early developments of Hitler's political beliefs and the party itself, the National German Workers' Party.
National Socialist German Workers' Party. But again, many lessons to be taken away from. But for me personally, the most powerful lessons are understanding how politics actually works.
Mm-hmm.
It's a popularity contest to get people elected. Nothing more. People don't vote their people don't vote policy. They vote their emotions. Number two, without political power, you have nothing. You're begging. You can call it whatever you want, but if you don't have political power, all you're doing is begging. And if we understand that power only respects power, what will your begging ever get you?
Exactly. And another lesson to be learned too. Just because you have a piece of paper to your name does not mean you're intelligent. And I say that because tonight was a perfect example where you had these so called educated being persuaded and truly believing that a man who tried to run away from being enlisted in the German army during World War One is somehow the best man to lead Germany into the future. That's something too the audience needs to keep in mind, that being educated does not mean you're intelligent.
Well, I can do you one better than that. You know, when you have early onset dementia, how do you vote someone to be the president, to be the leader of your nation? But, you can tell me about misreading teleprompters and everything else. I just don't get it. Is this your king?
Or the mere fact that you only voted this person in because the last person in office, you have such a hatred for him that anybody that is not him
Is
would be
better.
better for the job. If that's not running on emotions, I don't know what else is.
You know what? Yeah. So on that note, it has been a good one.
All right. With that said, I am Admiral Sigler Jones. This is my co-host Logic Finest. Thank you all for tuning in. Until next time.